Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Hope your language learning is going well. This podcast is, of course, the place where we talk about all things language learning. So if you're learning a new language, you're in the right place. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. It's funny, isn't it, how people say don't forget as if it's something that you'd already planned to do. I'm sure you didn't listen to this episode intending to subscribe, but not actually subscribe. It's one of those things that we say, isn't it? Don't forget to subscribe. Okay, I'm going to change that around and issue a command. Subscribe to this podcast. If you're not already subscribed, go onto the iTunes app or the Google Play, whatever you use to subscribe to listen to podcasts. Look for the I Will Teach You a Language podcast and hit that subscribe button. That is my command. Don't forget. What's that all about? Anyway, subscribe to the podcast. This is where we talk about language learning every single week. So if you're trying to learn a different language, a new language, this is the place where you're going to get motivation and tips to carry on in your journey. Tips like something I received, a very nice email I received from Jonathan recently. And I like to read out emails, nice emails from people. I don't read out the not so nice ones because I do get quite a few actually. It's amazing the kind of things that people will send you over email when they well, not even anonymously actually. People are funny, people say the strangest stuff. Anyway, Jonathan isn't funny. Jonathan's cool. And he said, "Hi Ollie, thank you for your work in encouraging others to learn languages. Your advice about not learning two languages at the same time has probably saved me a year of frustration. I was trying to learn Dutch and Chinese at the same time. I like the format of your podcasts. Keep it up." And that's from Jonathan. Thanks very much, Jonathan. Yeah, what can I say? Learning two languages at the same time. If you've got the will and the desire, then, go for it. But I think for most people would, if you haven't ever felt or experienced learning a language from the beginning to actually, the point of being able to use it quite fluently, like that is kind of the big elusive thing, right? And actually experiencing that process of learning a language to fluency is so powerful that I think for most people who would like to learn two languages at the same time, it is probably better to focus on one and just give yourself the gift of that experience, the experience of learning one language to a high level, because there's nothing like it. So I'm glad that worked for you. Jonathan, we have a related question today. Okay, without any further ado, let's hear today's question from Kristen.
Hi, Ollie. My name's Kristen. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I've been studying Bahasa Indonesia for a few months now quite consistently. At least an hour a day is my minimum, but I try to exceed that. Most of the time I have good days. I feel really motivated and I'll get little quick wins that make me feel strong and where I'm at in my learning. But then I have other days where I feel like there's so much more for me to learn. How I envision it is me standing in front of a huge ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and knowing that I can swim, but I can swim across a lake. I can't swim across an ocean, and it just feels so impossible. So I was wondering if you have any advice on how to get through this and continuously stay motivated, even though it just seems like so much and such an impossible feat. Thanks.
Hey, Kristen, thank you very much for your question. And I think everybody listening will be able to relate to that. So you're not alone. That's the first thing to say. Motivation is a moving target. It's something that you always have to be thinking about. And I think really motivation is the gatekeeper to learning languages. And it's why it's so important to talk about motivation. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter how good your study techniques are, right? If you're not motivated, then you're not going to sit down and study in the first place. So really, motivation is one of the most important things. I still struggle with motivation. It's always a little bit different. It changes from project to project, language to language. And it has as much to do with what else is going on in my life as anything else, right? So it's very, very personal. I think the time that I remember most recently where I really kind of had this feeling I love your metaphor, by the way, of like standing in front of an ocean and knowing that you can swim, but not knowing whether you can reach the other side or even be able to see the other side. Right? I think the most recent time that I experienced that was probably when I was learning Cantonese, and I'm not actively learning Cantonese anymore. It's I still speak it from time to time, but I'm not actively studying it. But there was a time, a couple of years ago when I was studying Cantonese quite actively, and I remember being in Hong Kong for a little while. And I actually remember sitting down on the bus. I was taking a bus from one place to another in Hong Kong. And I remember sitting down to study and listening to this audio that I had. And then I listened to it through once and I just pressed stop. And I sat back in my chair on the bus, in the seat. And I just thought exactly what you just articulated, which was, I could keep doing this every day for the next 5 years and I still wouldn't be any further ahead. Or at least I feel like I wouldn't. What's the point? Like, what is the point when everything I'm doing is just, well, I just seem to be moving so slowly towards my goal. And then if you have those feelings, then really what do you have to do to pick yourself up and say, actually, no, this is worth my time. This is worth so much of my energy. So I get it. I know exactly what it is like. If you've learned a lot of languages before, then every time you learn a new language, you get confidence. You gain in confidence about your own method. And I think a lot of this comes down to you having the confidence, Kristen, about what you're doing. If you've learnt 5 languages before, all using the same method, then you're not going to be doubting what you're doing. But I think at the root of what's going on here is is a doubt as to whether or not what you're doing is working, right? You sit down to study for an hour, but it doesn't feel like you move any further forward. And this is really the experience of learning a language. It's that. It is the experience of actually doing a lot of work, but not being able to observe your progress moving forward in a tangible way. When I talk to language learners around the world, often one of the phrases that comes up most often is, I need to feel like I'm making tangible progress. Because that's what we're used to from other areas of study. Even the way we used to learn languages at school, right? There is a feeling of tangible progress because you get given a new grammar structure to learn every week. You get given tests and stuff. The trouble is that stuff doesn't really work. But we like it because of the psychological side of us that looks to measure what we're doing, likes the fact that there's some structure to it. But the trouble is with language learning, it doesn't work like that. It's not the case that you do 1 hour of study and you're 1 hour further forward. You can do dozens and dozens of hours and not feel any particular progress. But the great thing that experience brings you is that you know that progress comes. And often it comes at the most unexpected times. Recently, I've been learning focusing on Japanese a lot recently, and I had this experience where I've been reading every day. I've mentioned this a few times recently on the podcast. I spend every day reading at least half an hour a day. And, most of the time I could read every day for a week and I won't notice any difference. But then there was one moment a month or so ago when I remember walking down the street and I went to a Japanese event and I listened to all these people giving these talks in Japanese. And I was like, man, I understand so much more than I did a couple of months ago. And that was a wonderful experience. And it's those kind of experiences that you really have to latch onto. But accepting that they're not going to come every day or even every week or even every month is a really big step forward in staying motivated. Now, Kristen, in your particular case, 3 months you've been learning, that's not a long time. Okay, so let's get some perspective here. 3 months is actually quite a short time. I don't know if you've got any language learning experience, if you've learnt any other languages before, if you have any reference points. But Indonesian is obviously very different from, I guess you might have studied French at school or Spanish perhaps if you're in Canada. So this is a different language. It's going to take longer. I find that learning Asian languages, it just takes longer for your brain to adapt. 3 to 6 months is kind of a minimum for your brain just to start to wrap its head around the language. So you're just at the beginning, okay? So keep that in mind. Let's also recognize that this is a psychological problem, a motivation problem. It's not a language learning problem. All right, that hour a day you're doing, I'm sure you sound very smart. I'm sure that you're doing sensible things with that time. And so don't make the mistake of thinking that you're wasting your time or you're not learning, because I guarantee you are. It's just happening in the background. Okay. So let's talk about a few things that you can do to stay motivated, because I think that it's all very well for me to give you this kind of motivational pep talk, but sometimes, if you are feeling demotivated, then I think the best way to think about this is, right, let's almost throw language learning out the window here and do whatever it takes to stay motivated. Okay, I'd be perfectly happy for you to stop studying so effectively and so efficiently if the result of this change was that you're more motivated overall. Because again, once you lose that motivation, it's curtains, right? So a few ideas, a few things that I do if I'm feeling this motivational challenge. First of all, do a complete 360 in your study, all right? Which means try something totally different. This is often one of the most effective things of all, because it immediately gives your brain a kind of a fresh start, gives you a different perspective on the language. So if you have been studying by yourself, why don't you try taking some lessons with a teacher, or vice versa? If all you do is take lessons with a teacher, try studying by yourself. That's a very different dynamic, Your brain engages in a different way when you're face-to-face with someone or learning by yourself. If you have been studying, let's say you've been reading a lot, and all you do is spend your time reading, well, stop that and try listening instead. If the way that you study is generally through, kind of textbook learning rules and stuff like that, stop that and spend all your time getting immersion through listening and reading instead. So try something totally different for a period of a few weeks. So that's the easiest way to hit the reset button. Next is to make sure that you're doing something that really excites you. When you started learning Indonesian, I'm sure you had a reason, right? I imagine it might have been to visit Indonesia and to speak when you're there. And so let's recognize that if speaking is the thing that you want to be doing, then start doing that now. It's very easy to say, okay, I want to speak a language, but then you spend years with your head in a textbook. It's no wonder that you get demotivated, right? So start doing the things today. Start doing today the things that you actually want to do in the future, when you're actually fluent in the language. That way, at least you're engaging with the language in the way that's most motivating to you, most authentic to you. Next tip is related to this idea that language learning doesn't move in a linear direction. And this is to find strength from your daily practice. One of the things I really have learned to do as a language learner myself is to trust in the process. I try to never look for that outcome, the result, the day that I'm fluent or the day that I know all the Chinese characters or whatever, and instead to draw my motivation from the daily practice, sitting down every day to study or to read or to listen, whatever it is, for an hour. Knowing that is the key can really help to pull you out of that motivational slump sometimes, because just knowing that you're doing the right thing, knowing that intellectually, you can draw strength from that. It's like when you go to the gym every day, you don't expect to get a six-pack overnight, right? But you know that the act of going is powerful, and so you kind of you just have faith in that. You know that it's good for you, right? So the daily language learning practice, when you sit down, recognize, I am in control here. I'm doing the right thing. This is power. This is strength, and use that to drive you forward. Lastly, something that I'm really interested in at the moment is mindfulness. Now, mindfulness meditation is something that most of you, I guess, have probably heard of. It is really one of the big revolutions that's going on in certainly in mental health, but also in just holistic health in general. Because what mindfulness does is it really allows you it is the most effective antidote to stress and to lots of different psychological quirks that we have. And I won't get into mindfulness now. That's a topic for another day. But I would, if you are familiar with mindfulness, then try to apply some of the techniques from mindfulness meditation to these emotions of frustration and overwhelm. So, Kristen, when you were saying that, you just sit and you have this feeling of staring out across the ocean and not knowing where that leads to. Well, try to just sit with that emotion and magnify it. try to really examine that emotion from all different angles. So you can try. This is going to sound very woo-woo to some of you, but just trust me with this, right? So I do this thing every morning where I do a certain amount of meditation every morning, and it is just it's such a rock in my day. And one of the techniques that I practice is to take emotions that you're experiencing and just examining them as closely as possible. So let's take the emotion of overwhelm, that feeling that you get when you're stressed, where you have so many things going on and you just don't know where to start prioritizing stuff. Take that feeling, close your eyes, take that feeling and try to pinpoint the source in your body of that emotion. So where are you experiencing that emotion? Usually for me, like feelings of overwhelm, I tend to feel it like in that area between my stomach and my chest, right in the center of the body. There's kind of a tightness there. So just dive headfirst into this feeling of overwhelm and identify where is that in the body. Locate that in the body and then just try to investigate that feeling from all different angles. And what you stick with that for a while, for a couple of minutes, just looking at it. And what you find is that when you really examine an emotion in depth, this is something I learned from Sam Harris, the half-life of the emotion is very, very short, meaning it's impossible to stay in that emotional state for very, very long. The more that you examine this feeling of being overwhelmed, the less overwhelmed you'll be, and the more you might find that after just sort of 5 minutes of sitting quietly with this emotion, what happens to me is that I will then come out of that the other end and think, well, actually, okay, it didn't really make sense to be feeling all of that. Now let's just get back down to language learning and just sit down and get do the thing that you were supposed to do. I think I don't know how you will be reacting to this, to what I'm talking about here. I think for those of you who are familiar with mindfulness, you will know exactly what I'm talking about, and so hopefully that's helpful. Sometimes when we have these feelings of frustration or of overwhelm, the very real effect of that can be to stop us doing the things that we know we should be doing. And so spending time dealing with these emotions rather than kind of running away from them is, I think, an extremely emotionally mature way of going about it. And the more that you can learn that and the more that you can get better at that, the better. This is something that I've learned a lot from Sam Harris and his work with meditation. I find it such an incredibly powerful thing in my life. I've been experimenting with meditation on and off for a number of years, but it's now something that I do every day and makes a massive difference to my life. So let's just quickly recap those tips that I've been over for Kristen. So number 1, do a complete 360 in your study. Try something totally different. Number 2, make sure you're doing the thing that most excites you. So if you want to speak, make sure you're finding a way to speak the language, not just study it. Number 3, find strength from your daily practice. Know that by turning up every day to study, you are on the right track, and draw strength from that. And then fourthly, if you're into mindfulness and that kind of thing, try to apply those techniques to the emotions of frustration and overwhelm that you feel, and try to see if you can just tame those emotions and use that technique to get more consistent with your learning. So I hope that's helpful. It's very difficult to know how to tackle a big topic like this, but that's what I got for you. If you would like to ask a question like Kristen did, please go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. That's ASK. iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. And at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And I think this mindfulness thing, if it's not something that you're really familiar with and you'd like to investigate it more, there's really nothing that I would recommend more. It's fantastically powerful. My favorite app for this is the Waking Up app from Sam Harris. And it's not cheap, actually, but it is life-changing. If you've never done mindfulness before, then you owe it to yourself, I think, just to try it for a month and just see what happens. And this is especially important for you if you ever suffer from stress or any other kind of stress-related experiences. So you can find it on the App Store. Just go to the App Store and search for Waking Up. I believe there's an Android version as well, so you can try searching for that in Google Play or whatever the Android version of the App Store is called. I lose track of this stuff. So that's the Waking Up app by Sam Harris. It's expensive, but I think for most people, if you to make sure your mind is fine-tuned. There is not much of a better investment than that. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.